I have a weird experience that I wanted to share that was I honestly don't know what words to use to describe it. It was creepy in its own right, and honestly, it left me feeling a bit shaken. Thankfully, I came out of the whole thing unscathed, but I kind of feel like it could have gone much, much worse. So, to start off, I'm a delivery driver for a restaurant that isn't the normal kind that does delivery. I'm the only driver for this specific restaurant, and while we aren't as busy as, say, pizza shops, we do get enough orders to keep me busy for an entire shift. Because of this, I put a good number of miles onto my car, and I drain my tank pretty frequently. Sometimes I have to stop at random stations along the way or in between deliveries to make sure that I have enough miles left to get to the next stop, or stops, and then back to home base. It takes a good amount of coordination, and I have honestly pushed it once or twice to a limit that I don't like to push it to. This was, unfortunately, one of those times. It was near closing time, and I was on the last 3 deliveries. It was a triple, so I had to take one, then the next, and then the next as quickly as I could. I had gotten the first one done, looked up the location for the next, and as soon as I did, I noticed that the mile counter on my car showed 3. Basically, I had 3 miles to go until I was on a hard empty. I wouldn't say that this is the most accurate reading, but again, I don't want to end up randomly stranded with 2 people's dinner sitting in my passenger seat. I hit the button for the nearest gas station, and sure enough, there was one that was between 1 mile and 2 miles from where I was sitting. It looked like it was kind of tucked in between a couple of neighborhoods. Like, this was a really weirdly placed station, but I was thankful that it was close. I pulled away, made the quick trip to the station, and sure enough, it was there. Google wasn't lying to me this time. The building was dark, like they'd closed up the shop for the night, but the pumps had card readers and were definitely still on based on the lights shining on the screens and overhead. I pulled into the parking lot, got up next to one of the pumps, got out and swiped my card. Basically did all the things that one does when they're going to fill their tank. After a couple of seconds, I noticed a couple of guys standing next to the building. One of them was sitting on the ground and smoking. I could see the embers glowing in the dark, and the other was staring at me from underneath his hood. Of course, I was a bit on edge. I did have cash on me from the deliveries, but at the same time, with where he was standing, I would have had time to throw the pump and jump into my car before he could even get close. So, assuming he didn't have a gun or anything, I was cautious, but pretty sure I would be safe. I go back to filling up, and as the amount hits 5 gallons, the pump just suddenly stops. I stare at it, squeeze it once or twice, but sure enough, it was done with me. I looked up at the machine and then towards the building, as if there was going to be someone there to help me, when I noticed that the man with the cigarette in his mouth was now standing at the emergency shutoff valve, which explained why the pump stopped working. Within the second that it took me to realize that it was just him, I heard footsteps behind me and thought, I really just let this happen. After telling myself that I was going to be fine, and that I would have time to jump in my car, I'm seriously about to get robbed by this creep. I turned slightly, and, as expected, the man with the hoodie on is approaching me. But strangely enough, he's not getting very close. Like he was walking towards me, but stopped about 6 or so feet from me. He lifts his head a bit to stare at me, and I look at him, and there were several awkward moments that we shared while standing at this gas station pump. The whole time I'm just thinking, I'm dead, while glancing between him and the man at the shutoff valve on the building, making sure that neither of them is getting closer or pulling a gun or something. I honestly have no idea why I did this, but I looked up at the man in the hoodie and just kind of shyly said, The pump isn't working. Like, this man worked there and was going to go troubleshoot my problems. I really don't know why I said it. I guess it was just me being scared and confused as to what was about to happen. The man smirks, looks down at me and then up at the machine and says, "Station's closed." As if I wasn't already being awkward and weird, I pointed toward the card reader and said something like, "Oh, but I should be able to still get gas, right? The readers are 24/7. The guy in the hoodie seriously started laughing. Like I had just told him the most hilarious joke and he could not hold it in. After shaking that off, he shook his head and looked back at me to say, "No, mate, the station is closed. No more gas. Hint, hint." And then motioned for me to get into my car and leave. I stood there for a moment, and thankfully my brain finally clicked that he was telling me to get the hell out of there. I nodded, replaced the pump, and told him to have a good evening and got back in my car. As I did, I looked in my rearview mirror and I watched this guy put his fingers up to his head and motion as if he was shooting himself and start laughing again as he waved at me. I obviously took off from there, and it took a few moments for me to really get a grip on the whole thing, but I think he was basically telling me that if I came back, I was dead. I made a note of where I was and, well, I left. Now, I'm not sure, but I think that his original plan was much more sinister than what he had ended up doing. And I think that my awkwardness may have actually saved me. Like, I made my dumb comment and it tickled him to the point that he felt bad, and he thought, "Oh, I can't kill this pitiful idiot." Obviously, I have no idea if that's true or if he was just willing to give me the opportunity to leave, and if I didn't, then he would take action. But I'm glad that he decided I wasn't worth his time. Thankfully, that 5 gallons was more than enough to get me to my destinations and back to the store to clock out. I made a mental note to never go back to that station, and I haven't, thankfully. If I have a delivery over in that direction, I fill up before I go that way, just in case. I know it's not the creepiest of stories, but it scared me, and like I said, I came out unscathed, but I feel like I was pretty close to something pretty terrible happening to me.